Hello friends, and welcome back to PG Prototypes. In what seems like a distant pre-COVID past, I tried my hand painting some D&D minis. This human druid was definitely one of my favorites, but I never got around to making a base for him. I'm a huge fan of these Nolzur's minis because they have the most awesome detail. If you want to take a crack at painting one of these minis, I'll leave a link in the description below as to where you can find the product. In this video, I'm going to show you how I make bases for my minis using some basic leftovers from previous builds. I really hope you enjoy this first video of my minis base series, and please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. It really does go a long way in letting me know if I'm on the right track with my videos. I start by gluing some scrap 50mm polystyrene to a 6mm piece of circular MDF. I'm using CA glue with a spray activator. Stick the two together and you A for away. I'm holding the two together for a few seconds just to make sure that there's a good bond. You may get a little melting with the super glue, but I find that the activator dries the glue quick enough to not do any serious damage. I then use a hacksaw blade to shape the polystyrene to match the base. And then I add some cuts and grooves to simulate rocks. Just because this is a small piece doesn't mean you can't add some nice details. I'm cutting in some grooves to simulate water erosion, and these will look really cool with the wash later on. Once I was happy with how the rock plinth looked, I moved on to the next step. I want my druid to be standing on a rock outcrop, gazing off into the distance, searching for his next adventure. So I use a 12mm piece of polystyrene to shape a rock platform for him to stand on. I'm using a sharp craft knife to reduce the depth of this piece of polystyrene. I'd also like it to look a little more organic, and I want it to have some type of step on the top. When trying to get these pieces to look a little more organic, it's best to focus on getting rid of any right angles. I also try not to be too precise with these steps. I like a few chunks of the polystyrene to come out, as it adds a lot of character to the rock. Finally, I test fit the platform and I put my druid on top to see if it all fits well together. So far I'm really happy with how it's looking. I like to use contractor's acrylic to stick polystyrene together. It has a firm initial hold, but it allows you to move your parts around until you're happy. It also sets to a firm hold in about an hour. I stick the rock platform in place and I use a wet brush to blend the excess acrylic into the base. I don't have any sculptor molds, so I'm going to make my own. I shred some toilet paper in a blender, then I mix it with some plaster powder. I then slowly add some water and mix it into a smooth brushable paste. I don't really have an exact mixture for this, I just judge it by eye. The mixture gets dabbed and painted on, and I'm careful to not cover up the detail that I carved out earlier on. This is the end result, and you can see it yields a pretty good, realistic rock texture. The druid figure needs some extra support to stay in place, so I drilled a small hole in his foot and I glued in a piece of paperclip. I put some super glue on his feet and then I stuck him into the polystyrene. I made sure to do the step whilst the plaster was still wet, just so I could blend the figure into the surrounding a little more. Next, I want to add a bit of sand texture. I paint on a thick layer of PVA glue on all the surfaces I want to add a bit of character to. Next, I sprinkled on some regular garden variety sand that I had sieved through my wife's tea strainer earlier that day. I was extra careful to make sure there was no evidence that I'd ever used the tea strainer. To hold everything in place, I spray some water with a drop of dishwashing liquid in it over all the sand surfaces. I carefully add a few drops of watered down PVA onto the wet sand and I leave it to dry for a few hours. Once the glue had dried solid, I sprayed the model with some soap water I used in the previous step, and this allows the washes to flow more easily into the plaster. I painted on a light desert yellow wash and I used the neat paint to paint over the sand. I like to start with light washes and then I work my way darker, all while the paint is still wet. This just helps everything blend together. This is what the first wash looks like once it's complete. Next, I dab on some yellow ochre wash just to bring out a bit of colour. I follow that up with a hull red wash in all the crevices and deeper parts. And this is where we've landed up after all of that. I left the model out in the sun and made sure it was completely bone dry before adding a liberal black wash to accentuate all the shadows. I reckon it's starting to look like a piece of rock now. Now I want to pull all that detail out of that sand, so I'm going to dry brush a coat of khaki tan onto everything. I know it gets mentioned a lot, but when it comes to dry brushing, you really want to brush all the paint off your brush. There needs to be a minimal amount left, and the reason that you do that is so that it just catches the tips of the detail that you're trying to accentuate. And this is how it turned out. I performed the same technique with a little bit of yellow ochre just to bring out a little bit more color in the sand. The best way to approach this type of detailing is to start off with small amounts and then build up as you need to. Once all of this is dry, the last step is to do a white dry brush to really make all the peaks pop. I really want this mini diorama to have a fantasy feel to it, so I'm going to go quite heavy on the dry brushing. It's going to pull out a lot of detail in the rock. If you want something a bit more realistic, you really don't need to go as heavy on the dry brushing. As any druid worth his weight in gold is a master of the nature that surrounds him, I want to add a bit of nature to surround him. I use CA glue and some fine flock from Woodland Scenics to create a mossy look. I'm using an old paintbrush to push the flock into the CA superglue. I find that this just helps get everything settled and in the right place. Another cool benefit of using the CA glue to stick down the flock is that when it dries, the flock will actually dry hard. So you can use a slightly lighter color green to dry brush the tips of the flock. Now that all the messy stuff is done, I'm going to paint the base with an olive green. I decided to add a bit of lichen moss to the top and some of the crevices just to give the scene a little more detail and some character. And lastly, a small piece of dried flower that I found on a wild olive tree in my garden with a sprinkle of colourful flock. I coat the tips of the branches in some hairspray and I just lightly sprinkle some flock over the top. I had to do it a few more times to build up the quantity of flock that I was looking for. I was really happy with the model at this point in time, so I decided to end the project here. Let's take a look at the final product. I'm really happy with the end result, and I'll be happy to display this noble druid on my bookshelf. I watch a lot of YouTube makers and I watch a ton of tutorials, and I can honestly say that I am not even close to the professional category. But I really want to make videos that encourage people new to the hobbies to just get stuck in and do what you got to do to enjoy your hobby. Don't wait until you think circumstances are perfect to start. Just start and adjust as you go along. You will do the most learning when you make mistakes, so don't fear failure. Use the materials you have available and try to create things that just make you happy. The world is a stressful place at the moment, and my number one tool to de-stress is crafting. What you won't have heard in this video, as I muted it, is my 2.5-year-old and 1-year-old fighting over a paintbrush in the background as I recorded my progress. Did this stress me out, you ask? Why no, I was too busy enjoying my hobby to notice such a thing. Proof that a hobby helps you de-stress. Thank you so much again for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe. It's such a small act, but it makes a huge difference and it's greatly appreciated, not just for me, but anyone that you watch on YouTube. This is the first video in a series of tutorials on how to make bases for minis. I plan to release a few more in the next few weeks. Here are some of the figures that I have ready to go. Remember, the best time to start your hobby is right now, and until next time, happy modeling.